In this episode, my guest, Lovern Gordon, shares how she turned her pain as a domestic violence survivor into passion and personal power. Listen as she details this powerful story of transformation. Hello, and welcome to the Beautiful Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Johnson, a certified professional coach, mentor, writer, and speaker. I help professional women gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to pursue their bigger purpose and vision so that they can have fulfillment and thrive in their careers. I believe there is beauty in our voices, beauty in our stories, and beauty in our journeys. There is power in community, connection, and deep, meaningful conversation, which is why me and my guests are here to share our stories, experiences, lessons, and learning to inspire you as you walk the path and step into your next level. We go deep, sharing beautiful reflections of what this personal growth journey looks like in real, living color. This journey of pursuing our purpose and vision as we continue to evolve. It is my mission to empower you to believe in your power, to embrace your own uniqueness, and to be the best version of you. I want to see you thrive purposefully. Now on to the episode for today. Hello, and welcome to the Beautiful Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Johnson. In today's episode, we're talking about turning pain into purpose, passion, and personal power. From the time that we are born, everything that we see, hear, and learn is shaping us. It's forming our understanding of the world, our thoughts, who we are, and consequently, how we show up in the world. A personal growth journey helps us to understand these many different facets of ourselves so that we can become who we were truly created to be, the best version of ourselves, and so that we can step into greater purpose and vision in our lives. A part of this process is doing the inner work that will help us to grow and evolve on this journey. I talked about the importance of unlearning on our journey in episode 18. I discussed why if we truly want to step into our next level, we have to address the beliefs that are getting in our way, many of which are not our beliefs, but things that have been ingrained in us since we were a child. Another part of the work is healing. We all have wounds from trauma, abuse, and experiences that have caused us grief and pain. Sometimes we recognize this, but oftentimes life has a way of waking us up to the fact that we've been wounded, and as a result, we're hurting. It may show up in how we're carrying ourselves, it may show up in how we treat others, or it may show up in certain situations that we find ourselves in. However it shows up, life always has a way of waking us up to what we need to see on this journey. Sometimes we get knocked down a few times and get back up. Other times we hit rock bottom where life knocks us down so hard that we are then forced to see what life is offering. My guest today, Lovern Gordon, shares how life opened her eyes to what she needed to see. She shares how her childhood upbringing impacted her and consequently showed up in her life experiences. Lovern details this journey for us, what it entailed, the challenges, and how she was able to overcome and to heal. Lovern also shares how this journey has not only led to her reclaiming her personal power, but fueled her passion in the purpose-driven work that she's doing for domestic violence awareness. Work that is vitally important and having a huge impact in the lives of those affected by domestic violence and in the community. Take a listen. Hello, Lovern, and welcome to the Beautiful Reflections podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here today and to have this conversation with you. You and I both spoke at the Brave, Bold, and Beyond virtual summit, and we got a chance to really share our stories. And I didn't get a chance to hear your speech yet, but I did get a chance to connect with you and hear more about your story and your work. So I wanted to have you come on to talk about this today because I think you have a powerful story, and I love how it has yielded really a greater sense of purpose and passion for the work that you do, and also how it's allowed you to really step into your personal power.
Amen.
So tell us, what did you talk about for your speech for the summit and why you decided to share that specific story?
Yeah. So first of all, that day was just beyond dope. I mean, everything about it was fantastic. And why I chose what I chose was because I am a 2-time survivor of domestic violence, right? And the talk was centered around the legacy he left me. which is the title of my current book that's out right now. But I really wanted to show and give a backdrop of what it meant for children who grow up in domestic violence settings to be able to not only survive, but thrive despite what they'd witnessed as children growing up, despite the trajectory that they were set upon before they even had a choice. And to give the audience a sense of what that looked like and to show how important it is to be a supporter of people that have gone through this issue or are going through it. And maybe even people that you don't know that might be going through it, to have a non-judgmental sort of sense when you do potentially come into contact with people that have gone through abuse.
Absolutely. It's such an important message, and it's something that is so vitally important in the community. And then for those who just don't really have the resource, don't know that there are resources available to assist them.
Yeah.
And the work that you're doing it's just so important. It's so very necessary. And I love that it stems from this, this deeper story of yours, this deeper experience. So walk us through that a little bit. Take us back to, what this experience was for you and how it has shaped and impacted you and how it led to this story of yours.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I grew up on the island of Trinidad, as you mentioned. And so I, lived there for the first 15 years of my life. And while we had some great advantages of living on an island and being in that setting, we also were privy to monstrous and brutal attacks that our mother suffered at the hands of our father. And I saw that for 15 years while I lived there. He would use machetes on her. He would use beer bottles and, that he would stab her with from time to time. He would beat her in the house. He would beat her out front of the house. He would beat her with neighbors watching. And all these things as a child, maybe my first memory around 6 or 7 of it was horrendous. And you are left as a child feeling helpless, right? So our father ruled with an iron fist. He was very strict, wanted to make sure that his kids got an education. If you were a girl, that you didn't turn up pregnant. If you were a boy, that you didn't get into trouble. And unfortunately, children, as I said, that grow up in these types of settings and are experiencing what is called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, they typically tend to go on to become victims themselves or abusers. And, my oldest brother was very lashing out and angry in his school settings. He got expelled from 2 schools. My oldest sister, she, suffered the brunt of the child abuse as well. And she got beaten in front of her peers. She got beaten in the house. And so she ended up running away and never turned back. My oldest brother then had to move next door to the house that we lived in. And again, I saw all of this coming up and I wanted none of it, Catherine. So I decided that I would try to stay on his good side, get the good grades, go to school, do the chores, all of that. And by the time I was 15, he allowed me to move to the States to stay, to finish high school and live with my grandparents. He thought I had great potential and he allowed me to do so. So that meant leaving my siblings and my parents behind. So I came to the States, finished high school for 3 years, but then went back. And by that time, I'm now 18. My older siblings are older. My younger siblings are also older. And we're all not standing for him to put his hands on our mother. And he understood that over the next 2 years, which is the next amount of time that I was on the island. And he realized over that time, that period, that he was losing power and control over her. And he allowed her to migrate to the States with me once our permanent residency statuses came through. So myself, my 2 younger brothers, and migrated to the States again to live with my grandparents. And he remained on the island. And so for all the years that I had known myself, I kept saying that would never be me. I would never let anybody treat me the way that he treated her. I more so wanted to be more like him in the sense of having more power and control over my life. So I started getting the education. I started going to college at night. I got an entry-level job in corporate America. I was well-read. I was articulate, just like him, right? Because in my coming up, he made it cool to be him, right? In a sense that he had all this power over his life. He had power over other people. And so I didn't want to be abusive, but I certainly wanted to be more in control of my life more than my mom was. And I saw her as weak, as a victim, because she was uneducated at the time. She also was financially dependent on him. And I didn't want that. So by the time I'm now 21, I thought I had control. Entry-level job in corporate America, going to college at night, and I'm on my way to, at some point getting my own apartment. And I met this guy, and he had all the requirements. He checked all the boxes for me. Was handsome. He worked in corporate America like me. He took me on lavish dates once we started dating. He was very, professional, the whole nine. And so I thought that I had made it. Now I have this guy on my arm, and, he loves me and he pays so much attention to me. One of the red flags that I had missed. Things were great for about 3 months until he slapped me for the first time. So hard that I saw stars. And it was over something insanely trivial, over the fact that I hadn't checked in with him that morning via phone. Again, another red flag that I had missed, because he would call me repeatedly in the mornings before I even got to work. And sometimes it was concerning because I thought to myself, well, maybe he really wants to just make sure that I'm safe. And I would brush it off as, it's a compliment, Lovern. Like, he really cares about you. But sometimes I couldn't take the call, but I would take it anyway because I knew that he was making an effort. In my mind, I'm saying to myself that he's making an effort to really make sure that I'm good. So anyway, so that morning when I hadn't checked in with him because I was sick and I called the office, said that I wasn't going to be in, and went back to bed, he took it as disrespect to him. He took it as, me potentially staying home to be with someone else. And so he showed up at my house, was very irate, lunged at me and slapped me, and then stormed out. And I was left there thinking, what did I do to deserve this? What could I have done to not make this happen? But when I caught myself, I said, you know what? No, this wasn't my fault. I didn't do this. I told the truth and I'm done. So initially I thought, again, I had control of the situation. I'm going to be through with this guy. We don't have kids. We're not married, and I'm all set. That particular following weekend, he showed up at my house when I was not at home. And he delivered 24 purple roses, my favorite color, with a card saying that I miss you, I love you, I'm sorry, call me. And I had also turned off my phone because I didn't want to hear from him. He was the only person that I was receiving a ton of phone calls from at that point anyway. I was not talking to, I wasn't having general conversations with my girlfriends anymore. And this was part of the sort of that, again, pattern or behavior that I dismissed over the first 3 months because, there were times he would question how long I was talking to a guy friend of mine, right, that I had known for years. What was I talking about with my girlfriends who, we were just having casual conversation. So over a period of time, I took that as, oh, well, again, I'm with someone. He wants me to give him attention. I should not be on the phone this long with this person. I can see how he sees this as a disrespect because I'm talking to another guy on the phone. So over the period of 3 months, before you know it, I was distancing myself and I was being isolated from friends, right? So, again, all those red flags were missed. And by the time he slapped me and I initially had said that we were through, I thought I would get over him easy. It was not the case. And then he delivered these roses and I turned on my phone that Sunday night and there were a slew of messages from him apologizing. And I took his call and I heard him out and I heard the passion in his voice. And I heard him saying to me that I love you so much that you made me get crazy like that. It's because I love you. I get crazy to think about you with potentially someone else. So even within that apology, he was putting some of the blame on me, right? I didn't even realize it, but I heard his passion in his voice. I heard in that apology that, Lovern, maybe you should have done better. Maybe you should have really called him that morning to check in. And I took part of the blame. I took the apology, the flowers in my mind. I said to myself again, Lovern, you still have control. He's apologizing. My father never really went to those lengths to apologize to my mom. I never saw him bring her flowers. He's saying he's not going to do it again. It was just a slap, so it's not that bad. And that is how easy it is to fall into a cycle of abuse. Many people ask, how do people fall into these types of relationships? I considered myself a smart person at the time. I knew what my mother had experienced. But the thing with abuse is that it just doesn't pop up all of a sudden, right? You don't get into bed, quote unquote, with someone and then, the next day they beat you. That's not how it works. It's subtle behaviors that build upon a pattern of behavior that they are exerting over you that then full on come at a moment's notice. And then at that point, you're too far in mentally and emotionally to get unraveled, right? And so that pattern keeps building upon. And so I accepted that apology, and that turned into almost 2 years of abuse. Okay. And so it graduated from a slap. He never slapped me again. And so it was always punches about the body, punches about the upper torso, strangulation, pushing, pulling, verbal assaults, emotional abuse, right? Because it comes in all those forms. And I stayed until I got to my breaking point, which was about, again, 2 years later, where I was now living in my own studio apartment. And he had showed up that particular night. And I knew just from his demeanor and then with his tone that he wanted to start an argument, that he wanted to potentially beat on me. And I tried to appease him. He started rummaging through my stuff, and he came across some books that had moved with me for all the years that I had been in the state. And one particular book that he was shaking because he was always looking for something to pin on me. His paranoid, jealous behavior always made him feel that I wanted somebody else, that I wanted to be with somebody else. His insecurity level was high. And so this particular night he came in and he's rummaging through these books, and out pops a picture of me on the beach. And so this picture he looked at, he was light-skinned, African-American, and he got very beet red in the face. And when he looked at the picture, he flung it at me. And when I took the picture, up from the ground, and he went into the kitchen, I heard him rummaging through my kitchen drawers. I died inside because the picture was, as I said, was of me with my ex-boyfriend from Trinidad sitting on the beach on the sand, looking very happy. And I knew what he was thinking in his mind. Like he had finally gotten a piece of what he deemed evidence that I was unfaithful to him. And so he came back into the bedroom with a knife. And this was the first time that he had brandished a weapon to potentially use on me, because it was always, hands, fists, a strangulation, as I had mentioned. And he said, "I'm going to kill you tonight and nobody's going to find you." And I believed him, because at that point, I am not even talking to my mom or my younger brothers, because they saw from the outside looking in that this relationship wasn't all that I was cracking it up to be. But I never let on to them because I was so afraid of my brothers potentially going to fight him or get in trouble with him. My mom, I didn't want her to blame me. I thought that she would blame me and say, "You know what I went through. Why would you let yourself go through a relationship like that?" So I kept it to myself. And like I said, at this point now, I'm living in my own studio apartment. There is nobody. I'm away from everybody. And, I have this professionalism about me in my building that I don't want anybody to know that I'm getting beat behind closed doors, because I don't want anybody looking at me as weak. And so that night he straddled me on my daybed and held the knife up against my throat enough to let me know that he could slit my throat at any time. And he's pressing the knife up. He's then slapping me. So now this is the first time since that first attack that he's slapping me. So now I know between the knife and the level of anger that he's exuding, that this is a different type of beating. And I'm really thinking I'm going to die in that studio. And so he puts the knife down at times. He's punching me about the face, the body. He's shoving up my head against the bedpost of the bed. He's punching me very repeatedly. Then he would take the knife up, stand up, pace the floor, yell profanities at me, straddled me again, off and on, stop, go. This started at about 9 o'clock the night before and went till about 2 o'clock the next morning. So it was a night of torture. And then when he was done, he just laid in my bed and went to sleep. And what did I do? I laid next to him like nothing, right? I whimpered and cried in silence because I didn't want to arouse him. My cries, in the beginning, I thought were cries that he would hear. He would see my tears. At least that was my hope. And he would stop, right? I thought my tears would help change him, because he said as much, but it never did, right? And so that night, I know my tears and my crying and the level of pain that I was feeling would not do anything. So I just cried quietly. And then I also didn't want my neighbors to hear me, right? And so at about 4 o'clock that morning, I felt the sharpest pain that I had ever felt from this particular attack, Catherine. Felt like a dagger trying to pierce through my skin. And so I said to myself, Lovern, you've watched enough Lifetime movies to know that this is not, something's wrong here. And you can either stay here and be bleeding internally, or, a bone could be broken somewhere and you can stay with these injuries and, die here. You could wake up and you can start again, or you can make the choice to get yourself help. And I made the choice to get help. So I quietly that morning got up and put on a pair of jeans, a top, and a little cardigan and limped downstairs. I lived directly next to a train station, so there was always cabs there. And so I got into the first cab I saw and I asked them to take me to the neighboring hospital, which was about 6 or 7 blocks from where I lived. But we came to a red light that morning and the cab was stopped and my abuser realized that I was gone. And he jumped into his car and followed the cab and pulled up to the red light. And he started yelling profanities at me and yelling for me to get out the cab, that he wanted to talk to me. And I knew that he did not want to talk. I knew that I had made him mad. And I told the driver, I said, please, I'm begging you, please don't let me out this cab. I said, because if you do, I am as good as dead. That is my ex-boyfriend and he's trying to kill me. And he didn't say anything to me. He just looked at him. He looked at the cab. He looked at my abuser in his car and he ran the red light. And I was thankful because at this point, I knew that I was going to have a chance of getting away. My abuser then started drag racing the cab. But when he saw that I took a left and ran into the hospital, he sped away. I didn't understand in that moment that my voice potentially had so much power in it because, again, not till later did I realize that he felt and believed that I was for the first time going to speak up and say something about what was happening to me to hospital authorities. But I didn't. I went into the ER and the triage nurse asked me what happened to me. I said, I fell in the shower. And I said, I hit certain places, right? Because again, I didn't want to be stereotyped as the weak woman, right? Showing up, here's another person that got beat or whatever. And so, I did x-rays and the ER doctor then came in later. And the first thing he said to me was, who did this to you? Who did this to you? He said, because these injuries aren't consistent with you falling in the shower. And I froze. And he continued by saying, he said, I can get you help. Just tell me. And that word help is one of the most, at that moment, was the most daunting word I'd ever heard. Because help meant the unknown. Help meant the police getting involved. That meant my school was potentially going to find out why I was flunking my first year of college. My job was going to find out why I would come back to my desk looking sometimes out of sorts, right? Because he would show up at my job sometimes and, accost me for the short dress that I was wearing or the underwear was too revealing, accuse me of trying to pick up other men in the office. And that would result in strangulation or a push or a verbal assault. And I'd have to go to the bathroom, clean myself up like nothing had happened and get back to my desk. Well, this help meant that they could potentially find out why I may have looked out of sorts sometimes. And I didn't want any of that. I didn't want my family to find out at the core what was really happening in this relationship. And so I said, listen, my ex-boyfriend, I'm now calling him my ex, beat me up, but I'm begging you not to call the police. It turned out that I had upper torso and hip contusions and a laceration on the side of my head, which meant that he had punched so hard that the flesh on the inside had been swollen and bruised. And it could be treated with medicine and ice, thankfully, and I was able to go home. And that's what I wanted to do. I said, please don't call the police. I just want to go home. Well, unfortunately, I did not realize that, leaving is the most dangerous time for victims. How often do you hear on the news that she was getting ready to leave and take the kids and he killed her and the kids? She was getting ready to leave and he killed her and himself. Right? Because this goes both ways. Men do get abused too. He was getting to leave and she snapped. Right? And so I didn't understand any of that. And I thought again that I had now was beginning to regain some control, but I was nowhere near. 2 weeks had passed and I heard nothing from him. And I thought everything was good. I was trying to, get him out of my system. And he called me 2 weeks later and said, I'm coming over. And it was like nothing had happened. And I said, no, you can't come over. I had the locks changed and you almost killed me 2 weeks ago. And his response was, you look for some of that. And that right there reiterated why I needed to be done with this relationship, because he did not care about my well-being. I also didn't understand that he waited 2 weeks to call because he wanted to see if any heat was going to come his way, right? So the last thing he saw was me going into this hospital. And he probably was expecting that police were going to show up that younger brothers were going to show up to take care of him, and none of that happened. And so he was irate when for the first time now I'm saying to him, I am done. I don't want to be with you anymore. This relationship is over. And that sent him into a frenzy. That led to him showing up to my building, waiting for somebody to let him in the main door where the locks were changed, and banging on my door to let him in. When I refused to let him in and asked him and begged him to leave because I didn't want to get him in trouble, right? I just wanted the abuse to stop. I wanted to be done. He didn't want to hear that. He then came back. He left for a brief time, maybe 5 minutes, and came back with something, trying to get in between the locks of my door while pushing and banging his body up against the door to gain entry. And so that's when I finally called the police. And initially when he heard me talking, because I had tried to use my landline and that was dead, and then he heard me, talking, he said, "You're bluffing." But as he kept hearing me talk, he realized that I really was on the phone with the cops, and then he fled. And the police showed up a few minutes later, and I told them that I tried to call them on the landline. They sent a detective to the basement of my building, and it turns out that he had cut the phone lines in with the basement of the building. And he wanted to make sure that I had no access to the outside world once he got in to call for help. And so that day, he realized from there onwards that he couldn't physically touch me. So he started stalking me and leaving derogatory notes on a card that I had borrowed to get, back and forth. So it was nasty things that he would leave in notes, like anybody who F's Lovern is getting sloppy seconds. So I would have to fish notes like that off my car first thing in the morning. And that's when a friend of mine, who I was still very friendly with and lived in my neighborhood, she said, "You know what, you need to get a restraining order." And I went, I got one, and thankfully he adhered to the order and backed off. But many victims do not get that chance, right? Many victims, how often do you hear, like I said, they went to court and she was shot. She went to the police and, the next day she was found dead. And so many victims don't get that chance. Over the next 10 years, I worked on Lovern finding herself. It was very hard in the beginning to even look the other gender in their eye. So looking at men anywhere when I was with this guy was not allowed. Even if we were sitting in traffic, if a car pulled up next to us, at a red light, and a man happened to be driving and my eye happened to glance over, he would accuse me of inviting attention, unwanted attention. And so as an individual now trying to heal from this relationship, it was insanely hard. I needed to trust myself. I needed to reassure myself that I didn't do this to me and that, I needed to find Lovern again. And I did over the next 10 years. And I ended up taking part. I was dared actually to take part in a local beauty pageant. And I ended up winning the thing, right? So I go into this thing thinking I'm just going to complete this dare. I can do this and win. And then I had to go on to the nationals in LA to compete there, and I ended up winning there as well. And so now I have these two titles and I have to pick a platform, and domestic violence awareness was an easy choice. And so I used that year to advocate for what I thought were awareness initiatives, because at the time of me experiencing this issue, I didn't even know the term domestic violence. I didn't know what help was. I didn't know what help pertained to. And that's what it is for a lot of victims oftentimes, is that they are afraid of the unknown. And so that year, and on top of that, right, so I lived in a predominantly Black community. I had never seen any awareness posters, campaigns where I lived. And that was sort of one of the driving forces, was how do I educate other women that look like me about this issue, even men, right? How do I make them know that where they are isn't where they are destined to be? And so that work happened for about a year with those two titles. But once the year was up, I really wanted to continue this work. And that's where Love Life Now Foundation was formed. And so this is our 10th year that we've been doing this awareness work. And again, it primarily centers around education and educating the community, and really now worldwide, about what this issue looks like from behind the scenes.
No, that's such a powerful story, and it's so much depth in that, and so much that we can unpack. I love your transparency. I love that you just shared to us what exactly it looked like,
Yeah.
While you were in the middle of it, what you were thinking, what you were telling yourself, what you were afraid of. And I think that paints a very vivid picture for everyone to see, what it looks like for someone who is a victim of abuse. And you also address a lot of the questions that pop up that people tend to say when someone does find themselves in a situation, like, what did she do? What is she doing? Like, how does she get herself in that situation? Like, pointing the blame back to the victim.
Yep.
And so I think that's very important that people know that, the blame never should be pointed back to the victim. It's never the victim's part in the story.
We must hold abusers accountable. And this narrative that has been developed over years and years and years, that somehow it is, and really that's what it is, right? It is on the victim. It's the responsibility of the victim to leave and, know when to leave. And you shouldn't let that happen to you. And you need to pick up your life after this has happened to you. You don't need to wallow in what's just, broken you down for, how many ever months and years. And you need to show up for the world like everything is great. And that is just so wrong, but that's what society says. And that's what makes it hard a lot of times for victims to come forward because they're not given permission to. A lot of the times we're behind closed doors because people in our midst, in our circles, in our surroundings, you're hearing them. That would never be me. Man, she's weak. Like, I would never. And at that time, when I first got into that relationship and I had that first attack, I was that person. I was in it. I was being groomed into it. Didn't even know it, but I was still saying, how could my mother had let herself go through this? Why didn't she just leave and stay gone? Why did she always have to come back? I didn't get it, right? I didn't understand that she was in survival mode, that she was trying to live and was not allowed to live as an individual. I didn't get that. And so I regret it. There were many years, and even many years later, after this issue had happened to me, I asked my mom, why did she stay? And I regret ever asking her that because that's not the question. And I did pose this question to my father many years, after I grew up, I was 18 at the time. Why did you do the things that you did to our mother? And his response was bewildering to me because now I'm 18 and I have a sense of self per se. And his response was, it didn't make sense, first of all. And in it, he was blaming my mother. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, no, that she didn't know. And I left his response there, but, I didn't understand till many years later that abusers never take accountability. They never take responsibility. But it's on us as a society to do that, right? What are we doing when we give a very slap on the wrist sentence to someone that's broken someone down? What are we doing when they hurt children through child abuse? What are we doing? What are we doing when, it's someone in your circle and you say, well, he's a good guy. Otherwise, I've never seen him do anything outside of the sorts, when we're together. Well, he's a great employee. I mean, he really he performs when he's at work. So it's okay to beat his wife, right? So it's okay that I'm friends with the victim as well, but I put my friendship above that, right? With the guy, I put my friendship up with the abuser above it. And so us as a society, we have to make this our business and check our mindsets around it, right? How are you showing up in your spaces for people that might be going through this issue? What are you saying? What is your message saying? What is your message saying to your children in your house, right? Even if, you say to yourself, well, I don't beat my wife, right? But how are you treating their mother on a day-to-day basis? What attitudes and behaviors are you exuding? So what, are you showing affection? Are they hearing honest conversation? Is there respect? Is there boundaries? Is she allowed to go where she goes and you take her at face value? All of these things children are soaking up. So even if a punch is never thrown, if a slap has never landed on his or her face, they're still picking up on emotion of mom, emotions of you, And this is where you need to give children, or where we need to give children more credit, because those attitudes and behaviors are followed, or they follow them into adult relationship. And this is where the cycle of abuse tends to repeat. Again, whether it's verbal, emotional, or physical, it shows up in one way, shape, or form. And again, so how are you sort of being part of the solution from home? What conversations are you having around healthy relationship? What are you saying to your boys, right? From very early on about what it means to love another person. Are you respecting boundaries? Are you talking about safe touch? Are you talking about, loving behavior, right? And then loving being an action word here, not, do as I say, right? Versus what I do, because they are going to, again, soak up what they see from you. So I can go on and on. Catherine, but I'm going to let you get a word in.
No, this is so good. Absolutely. Absolutely, like taking responsibility for our actions and the part that we're playing. And I love the part that you mentioned about, children, like they're taking it all in. They see it, they hear it, and they're learning. And what they're taking in is what's shaping them. And ultimately it's what's causing them to show up in the way that they're showing up in the world and how they're being and how they're taking that into their lives, and then, we have these experiences and these situations where, we're left to do the work, right? We're left to really heal ourselves, pick up the pieces. And that's where the work begins. And you talked about how, that was a long journey for you. Like 10 years is a long time to really find yourself, to work through the grief and the pain and to come to some semblance of normal after going through such a traumatic experience. What do you think was the biggest thing that helped you during that time?
I think so. Church. I was gonna try to find something else profound, but church. I had shied away from church during this relationship. Again, I was isolated, and everything was him, and making sure he was okay, and checking his emotions. That I left myself by the wayside, and so going back to church was sort of the opening. Or for me, it certainly wasn't the healing door, but it was part of it. And so going back to church, that meant I was now reacclimating myself with community and being able to be free and worship and be amongst like-minded folks like myself that wanted to just love on the Lord, who in turn loves us. And so the premise, and it would come through so many sermons that I had heard during that time, the premise that God loves his children, and he would never want anything like what I had gone through for them. He would never want me to stay in that type of deal. And so even though I second guessed myself about whether or not I had made the right decision, did I go to extreme lengths to get rid of him? Maybe he just wanted to be heard and I was overreacting, right? These are the things that I was brainwashed to believe over the relationship, so that when I finally did it, it's not that I did it with conviction. It was because I needed to do it. It was life or death, right? In my mind, right? And so going to church really redefined that mindset, and that I had made the right decision. So church was initially, and then, I'd say maybe 2 years before I entered the pageant, or maybe a year, I sought counseling just to put everything out, right? And that also, I think, helped me as well, and sort of made me feel confident enough that I was like, okay, I can do a pageant, right? I don't care who's looking at me on a stage, right? Because again, Lovern was back, right? And I needed to reassure myself. And maybe that was part of the reasoning for taking that dare, is that I can do this, right? No more am I hiding behind, I'm too loud with my social butterflyness and my personality. I was led to believe that was too much, right? And that I needed to just focus on him. And so, those were the two driving factors in me coming back to who I knew I was from the beginning.
Absolutely. Church and community, giving you that community that you need with other people, and counseling, such a big thing, a space where you can talk things out, talk through your feelings, make sense of everything. And like you said, for you, it was the whole, getting past the doubting and the questioning and any type of blame that you may have, considered as it being, did you make the right choice, or were you making the right decisions? And that's a lot for any person to work through and to navigate. Anybody. That's very heavy for anybody to deal with, because you don't know. You just don't know. And so you have to go back and do all the reckoning for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're left to pick up the pieces, and society says that especially if you have kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to those kids? Why are you there? And it's not as easy as it's not black and white. I mean, leaving is not easy. I mean, to even get to the point where you think about leaving, it is a big, big choice.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the heart of this fear for victims, right? Fear of losing community. Maybe you live in an affluent situation. People are going to ostracize you because, again, the guy is well-to-do, and, they're going to say you're lying and it's just because you want money or whatever the case, right? So then there's kids involved. Well, he beats me, but he takes care of the kids. Well, he beats me, but he's a good father. Well, he beats me, but he pays the bills. All of these things that you have to think about for the long run, right? And sometimes you may have friends or family that say, leave and just leave and, come stay with me. But what does that mean? What does that mean for me and my children long term? How long can I sleep on your couch? How long can I uproot them from where they are, the only home that they've known, right? So there's so many factors that go into, what leaving looks like, that it's, again, not black and white, and it's not as easy as people think. So I just, again, urge people to be non-judgmental when it comes to this issue and be a little bit more supportive. Find out what the domestic violence agency is in your area. Offer that piece of information to a victim or somebody that you think may be going through it. Say to them that this is help and these are the services that they offer. It's not just shelter. And shelter in the sense of, right? So when I heard help, I also thought about it would mean that I was going to a big open room with a bunch of women that I didn't know, with a bunch of beds spread out, right? That's not what domestic violence shelters are. They are set up typically in home settings, and everybody has their own room, and they only can take up to 7 to 12 families because it's in a house, right? A very big house oftentimes, or an apartment building. And so, again, 7 to 12 families, you have your own room, you share the common areas. There's typically a play space for the children, right? So again, they want to treat you with dignity. They want to try to help you get reacclimated into society. So they have legal counsel, they have legal advocacy, they have court advocacy, they have counseling for you and or your children. Just a plethora of services that they offer. And I urge folks to check them out. Again, even if you're on the outside looking in, know what those resources are so that you can offer empowerment to the victim.
Yes.
So that when they're ready, because again, when your time frame for leaving may not be their time frame, but at least they know that help exists and they can navigate it on their terms. So
yes, yes. I love it. I love it. I can hear the passion in your voice. And I just love how this has turned in such great passion and purpose for you in the work that you're doing, and how you've been able to turn this, this pain, this experience, this trauma into something beautiful. Yeah. So I have to ask you the question, what would you say in all of this? Like when you think about all of the whole experience, everything that's happened so far in your life, everything that you needed to see and learn, what do you think has been the beautiful reflection that you can share with us today?
Where you are was never where you were destined to be if it's in a space like this. And that you can thrive after abuse, not just survive. And I think that's something I do not take for granted on any given day, that I'm able to do this work through Love Life Now Foundation. So I recently wrote a book. It's called The Legacy He Left Me. You can find it at thelegacyheleft.me.com. And it's a memoir about my experience as a child witness and as a young adult at 21 to 23. And it really goes in depth about all of the things that victims go through behind the scenes, again, even from being a child, and really connects the dots with, the scientific terms about what you're going through, gaslighting, what the signs are for abuse, who abusers typically prey upon, and the tactics that they use. So it really breaks down the issue behind the scenes, but it also talks about self-care and what that looks like, what leaving can look like, how to leave safely, and thriving after abuse. And so for me, again, the privilege is all mine to be able to do this work and now to write the book. That certainly has been something, again, that I don't take for granted, because there are a lot of people that have left and still can't find their voice. They're still locked up in that mental warfare. There are people that have left and are just surviving, right? Just trying to, pick up the pieces. And again, have been able to do this, again, forming the foundation for, 10 years now. And now the book, it's just something that, again, I do not take for granted. You couldn't have told me as a child in Trinidad, 6, 7, 8 years old, looking up at the stars every night, praying to God that he would get us out of the situation. He would get my mom out of the situation, or just at the very least, make my father stop, right? Mm-hmm. Be a good or better person in that regard, because I did respect him to some degree. I respected him. I did. So there was this love-hate relationship between the monstrous acts that he did over my siblings and my mother, but then I also respected his level of education, his well-readness, his articulateness, his charmingness. I respected all of that. But if you could have told me then, 6, 7 years old, that this is what it would have been now today, man, I would have fast-tracked to that. I would have fought tooth and nail to find my mom help on the island. Looking back now, I understand that there was help at the time. Didn't think there was. Something, but again, we go through these experiences, right? The pain into beauty, the pain into purpose, the ashes to beauty, because, God wants us to see that, he loves us. And if we just turn to him, that's my personal belief, not saying it for anybody else, but, if we turn and just ask for help, whether it's, heavenly or earthly, that it is there. And so that's my reflection on this experience.
Yes, beautiful indeed. Thank you so much for sharing your story and all of the gems. Thank you for dropping the questions that people can ask themselves as far as what they're doing to increase the awareness and the education. And how can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on the web. It is www.lovelifenow.org. And all of our social media connections are there, as well as our toll-free number. If you are looking to get pointed in the right direction for help, if you need a leg up with a domestic violence resource expense you've just left and you need, help with transportation, help with food expenses, help with clothes that you've had to leave behind, anything directly related to just leaving and getting safe, we can help with that. And that also includes maybe putting you up in a hotel for up to 2 to 3 nights, so that you can, if you've called, the shelters and there's no space, we can put you up, like I said, for 2 to 3 nights so that you could continue to call to find shelter. So that's called our Get Safe Fund, and you can access that on our website as well. Our toll-free number helps point you in the right direction for help. Emotional support if you want to call and talk to another survivor like myself. And so, on the web, lovelifenow.org, and the book, and you can access it to our website as well, but you can also find it at thelegacyheleftme.com.
Thank you so much for all of that. I will put all of that in the show notes for people to find you and connect with you. And again, thank you for being here and sharing your story today.
Thank you, Catherine. It was an absolute honor.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. That was an extremely powerful story of transformation, turning a very painful experience into purpose, passion, and reclaiming personal power. I love Lovern's beautiful reflection. Where you are was never where you were destined to be if it's in a space like domestic violence. And you can thrive after abuse, not just survive. Such a beautiful story of her reconnecting with God and community and receiving the support of counseling, and ultimately coming back to who she knew she was from the beginning and no longer hiding her personality and who she is by design. We all have a part to play in domestic violence awareness. It starts with having more empathy for victims without personal judgment and being more supportive. Victims are never to blame, and we must hold abusers accountable. We have to make it our business and check our mindsets by reflecting and asking, how are you showing up in your spaces for people that might be going through this issue? What is your message saying? What are you saying to your children by your daily attitudes and behaviors? How are you being a part of the solution in your home? What conversations are you having around healthy relationships? Be sure to connect with Lovern and check out the services that her Love Life Now Foundation offers so that you have knowledge of the resources that are available for yourself or someone that you may know. Make sure you purchase a copy of her new book, The Legacy He Left Me. I've included all of the links in the show notes. If you are enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave a rating and a review. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and your continued support. Until next time.